During the last weeks, I made a low-resolution dog dating sim, and in this video, I will show you how I did that and also explain to you why I did that. But let's start from the beginning. It is a well-known fact that constraints and limitations do not destroy artists' creativity, but in many ways even inspire it. The current state of computer technology and the incredible amount of easy-to-learn software for game development lifts a lot of the constraints developers had to deal with just 20 or 30 years ago. So, it might be a good idea to force yourself under some artificial constraints just to keep your creativity muscle in a healthy and good shape. Now, let me introduce you to the LowRezJam Game Jam. An annual 2-week game jam with one constraint. Every game is only allowed to be displayed in a 64x64 pixel resolution. I already participated in this particular jam 5 years ago, and since then I always wanted to do it again, but never found the time. Now I was finally able to make it happen, so I just had to come up with a game idea. I'm not an expert when it comes to visual novels and dating sims, but I enjoy playing the more obscure ones like Doki Doki Literature Club or How to Fall Boyfriend. And I always wanted to make one by myself. I also wanted my dating sim to be wholesome and cute, so I thought, why not go for some lovely humanoid dogs living in a fictional dog city to build the game around. I do love dogs because everything about dogs is adorable and lovable, so this seemed to be a good match. Since I also wanted the game to be wholesome and not weird, the goal of the game should not be to actually date the dogs in a romantic or any other way, but just to make them like you, and if you succeed, they will go on a very platonic playdate with you. Before I started to implement anything in Unity, I wanted to create a little mock-up in Sprite first. For backgrounds and locations, I decided to go for classic Japanese visual novel backgrounds like the roof of a school or just an inner city location. I then overpainted these and played around with some details to achieve a good look at the low resolution of 64x64 pixels. Now I had to choose the first dog I wanted to add to the game. Since I'm a really big fan of pugs, as you maybe can see in my apartment, I decided to make a pug the first character of my game Doggo Dating. So with all these references lying around my place, I came up with this cute pixel art pug which I called Luna. Now that I had a background and a first character, I went into Unity and started to set up a render texture which would help me to make sure that the game is always just rendered at the target resolution. I added the mockup sprites and played a bit around with them. Worked like a charm. Now, one important aspect of visual novels and dating sims is of course text. When you are working at such a low resolution, text becomes an issue, especially if you want to show as much text as possible. So I went to Pentacom and made my own very low resolution pixel font inspired by similar fonts I found online. In combination with using TextMesh Pro, I was able to achieve a result which was satisfying to me. The next step was to code some scripts which would allow me to animate the text in a way every letter shows after the previous one. Then I also developed a very rough sequence framework and a scriptable object in which I then could define a sequence of texts and animations the dogs should say or perform. This would act as a very simple dialogue and choice system, which I then could use to add some narrative and story to the game. Now, it was time to go back to Sprite and pixel a second dog character. This time, I decided to go for a corgi, since corgis are probably my second favorite dogs right after pugs. This time, I also went straight into animating because just a still image of a dog would be quite stiff, and if something should be easier in such a low resolution, it should probably be animation. After the art for our corgi, who I called Cody, was done, I went back to Unity, added the animations, and then programmed another feature to the dialogue system which was quite important. A choice system. The idea was that during every encounter, the dogs would say their lines, and after that they would ask the player a question. Based on the player's answer, the dogs would then choose one or another subsequence to continue the dialogue, and the dog's affection would either increase or decrease. After all, the dialogue and story system is not as complex and powerful as it could be, but for a basic game jam visual novel, it should be able to do the job. Now that almost every core gameplay feature was implemented, I still had something on my list which was quite important. I wanted to have an overworld map of Dogville so that the player could choose which location he or she wanted to visit. Every day or evening there waits a different dog at each location, and if the player figures out the correct choices, the dog will tell the player where it will hang out the next day or evening. So it is easier for a new player to follow exactly one dog and increase the corresponding affection. It took took me quite some time to get the map to a somewhat decent state, but after that was done, I was quite happy. Now there are 4 locations: the park, the city, the school, and the beach. At this point during the game jam, I felt the clock ticking and time became a really limited resource. I wanted to add at least 2 other dogs and also do a lot of polishing, but I still had to pixel 2 other backgrounds and then white all the dialogues. Since I also had other things going on in my life during the game jam, I really had to crunch to get the game to a state at which I was at least somewhat happy to submit it to the game jam. So I cut 2 new dogs for now and focused on the important tasks at hand. I pixeled the backgrounds for the beach and the park, implemented a super basic start screen, and then wrote a story for Luna and Cody. Until now, I did not yet develop some sophisticated characterization of both characters, so the dialogues and stories were somewhat freestyle and all over the place. I added some dog puns because of course I did, but I felt that I could have done better at this department. In the end, I was able to submit a build to the LowRezJam before the deadline ended. I created some artwork for the itch page and tried to make everything as nice as possible. Since I had 4 locations in the game but only 2 dogs, every dog was constantly at 2 locations at the same time. That was far from perfect, but at least I achieved my main goal. I did make a wholesome low-resolution dating sim in just 2 weeks. After a week, the voting period was over and the results came in. And they were somewhat mixed, but also what I expected. My jam submission of Doggo Dating did not even have music, so out of 338 entries, I only made the 211th place. But on the other side, I was able to rank 19th on authenticity and even 14th on visuals, which was really cool. Nevertheless, I wasn't satisfied yet. I really liked the game idea and how it played out, but I did not want it to stay online in such an unpolished state and with such random characters. So I made a choice to develop a post-jam version and spend more time on Doggo Dating. Let's go! At first, I decided to add some animation to the background. I recycled the cloud shader I developed for Exocolony and made the clouds in the background actually moving. After that, I recycled another shader from an older project, my well-loved transition shader. I pixeled a dog-themed transition texture and added that to the game. Much better. Now, I programmed a custom editor for my dialogue sequence tool, so it was much easier to write longer sequences for the dogs. Speaking of dogs, I also had to add 2 new dog characters to the game. So, I jumped into Aceboid and started pixeling. At first, I made a golden retriever called Emma. The ears were a bit of a struggle, but I think she turned out quite fine. For the last dog, I decided to go for a husky. I called him Bob. Now that there were 4 dogs in the game, I deleted all the existing story and dialogue and wrote new storylines for each of the 4 characters. I made sure to add as many dog puns as I was able to. Shout out to my YouTube buddy Saul, who was so nice to create some unique ones just for this game. With these new dogs and the new and improved dialogues, I was finally satisfied and uploaded the post-jam version to itch. If you want to play the game, feel free to check out the link in the description. Feedback is very welcome. I really had a blast working on this small project, which was actually quite out of my comfort zone. Like I said at the start of this video, constraints can really inspire creativity, and I felt the same while working on this game. We will see each other soon in another video on this channel. Until then, have a good time and bye!